Okay, the absence of the supervisor, the clerk will call the meeting to order at 5:03. Roll call is Supervisor Durant. Trustee Marks and Trustee Everson are excused and absent. Trustee LaRue.
Here.
Trustee Wiegand.
Here.
Treasurer Johnson.
Here.
And Clerk Rattire is here. Public comment, any public comment today? Going once, twice, 3 times, no public comment. Okay, we'll move into the budget work session, policy discussion, public works, and we will start with the solid waste fund first. So I will turn it over to Superintendent Page or Manager Gerard, whoever wants to start.
Okay, the solid waste budget. Let's see. Looking for the end of my memo here. Essentially, there's not a huge change, not much of a change at all. There are a few numbers I'm going to give you that I use to calculate the budget. It's based on 1,431 customers, which is basically what we have right now. The residential tons, we're predicting 1,072 residential tons and 1,110 commercial, or 918 commercial tons, and then 1,010 construction tons. The first Wednesday, which is called community development, I believe, in the budget, we're predicting it's going to cost about $13,591, and essentially, when all's said and done, I'm looking for a reduction of
25 cents. Garbage collection.
Yep, 25.
25 cents, right, from $14.75 to $14.50 per month. One thing that is going to be happening, which won't have a financial impact, I don't believe, may have some impact. It's hard to say at this point, but you're probably aware that we signed the landfill recycling agreement with the Marquette County Solid Waste Authority. Or I should say we re-signed. We've signed a couple of times. But anyway, they're going to be, as of January 1st of next year, not accepting glass in their recyclable material. It's just too costly, and basically there's no market. So what that means is there's going to be probably some increase in what's actually going to the landfill. And probably the only difficulty is going to be just the only time we really have difficulty with the public is when we make a change. So, for example, we were single stream for a number of years. Then when we switched to dual stream, which is basically different materials on different weeks, it wasn't like a revolution or anything, but there were a few complaints about that. So we'll probably get some about this as well.
So they're just going to throw it in the garbage, right?
Yep.
Well, from a practical matter, since we have our residents bagging their garbage, for the most part, glass is a lot heavier, will break. Is that going to create more issue with potential leakage or breaking out of the? I mean, there's more. I think
Putting
there's more.
inside the bag. Isn't it?
Yeah, there's more to consider with that decision than just they're not going to recycle glass anymore. It's going to the garbage. What happens when they pick the bags up and the bags break because of the extra weight? I mean, who's going to clean those messes up?
Yeah. Well, it'll be our contractor, and I haven't actually had a discussion yet with our contractor, so I can't really speak to what difficulties they're going to encounter.
You would think that they just, when they're sorting out, put all the glass one and then leave them dump it rather than have the people throwing the bags around, and I don't know, just. So that's why we're reducing it 25 cents, because they don't have to throw it in the recyclable one. Not just kidding.
Well, and I don't know the details, it's possible that, all that they've said, and I didn't see the entire presentation, I didn't see any of the presentation, actually, that the landfill director made to the city commission. All they're saying is they're not gonna recycle it, so it might still be able to go into the bins, but they'll just sort it out when they get there.
Well, the impression I got is one of the reasons, well, newspaper article tonight cited the cost of separating out that they wanted to avoid, so I don't
Oh,
think they're gonna
I
separate. I
didn't
think
see
it's just
that.
gonna go right into the garbage.
One of my little things about Kirk is that we have a reduction here of 25 cents. If we didn't reduce it, is there some years we could just say no increase? You know, I mean, we reduce it in different departments as we go by, and then all of a sudden the following year we have to raise it, and I just like to say.
Well,
why can't
this
we
is a
leave it
little bit-
alone and don't raise it in the following year or
It's,
something?
it's possible I could do that, but I mean, you know, ever since I've been here, it's been, you know, solid waste fund is doing pretty well. That
Well,
seems to be
if
the
we can
go-to.
hold it down without coming back and have to raise it in a year or so, that'd be great.
But again, it's separate from the water, or different from the water and sewer in the fact that it's really, there's not a lot that we have to do with it, other than we hire a contractor, and, you know, we pay the landfill. So,
Well, just the different articles that I read, are garbage going to cost us more and more money in the future. And, you know,
well, it will. I mean, I've certainly been questioning for years, you know, the annual report from the landfill keeps going. Every year it says,
Longer
yeah,
life.
we keep extending the life of the landfill. So it never seems that, it doesn't matter how much it ages, it's always, okay, we still got the same amount of future life.
Well, I would think that now, if we're putting all the
So-
glass in the landfill, that's gonna shorten its lifespan. The glass
be.
was not going in there before, and I know just from my own family, we have a high percentage of glass in the recycling.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure everybody does, it's,
I have a question too. At the last or couple meetings ago, the Solid Waste Authority changed where dollars were coming from what we pay them, 75 cents, moving 75 cents from that over to capital outlay. And I don't agree with that, because I don't know what it's all about, but they took what they normally would have taken, the 75 cents for the actual running of the landfill itself, that we would pay them, and moved it over to capital outlay with no discussion, no nothing in that too. And I think that's something,
We have referred that to Attorney Zappa, who's reviewing the actual articles of incorporation and the contracts to determine what that fund actually is and what restrictions there may be on it. So he's taking a look at it. But again, it's a unilateral action that wasn't taken up with the constituent members.
which is true, I just did it, and there was very little discussion, it was just done and over with and that.
But you should be, hopefully for your next board, well, maybe not on the 8th, but your second board meeting in November, I think that Roger should be in a position to be able to address that in terms of practicality or legality.
Yes, Dave?
Tagging on to what Treasurer Johnson is saying, I see on the next page that we're reducing, or they're increasing the tipping fees to $47.50 a ton because the amount of trash being, or landfill items being taken in there are on the decrease. And it would seem to me that your 75 cents would have been better off staying in the operation so that we wouldn't have to increase our tipping fees because the amount of landfill is decreasing.
well, you're talking about what they do with the money that they receive. I mean,
That's not our,
they do their budgeting, so if they're charging us $47.50, then that's what we pay.
Well, I'm not arguing that point. What I'm suggesting is they've increased their 47.50 to 47.50 per ton because the tonnage is decreasing and they still have their expenses that they have to cover. But at the same time, they've transferred, what was it, 75 cents or something?
75 cents.
From the other fund.
Over to a capital fund and taken it out of operations. It seems to me that we're driving that price ourselves just by moving that kind of money. And I understand that it's their budget, but it's really not their budget. We're all constituent members of that. So it's our budget. It seems to me we should have some input on that.
Well, you do. I mean, it's not direct. I mean, technically, there's no township representative on the landfill authority
All right.
because there are 20-some communities represented, and they don't have 20-some board members. And there is a lot of input. I mean, there's been, lots of people to go to the meetings. Lynn's been to meetings quite a bit. And they certainly have a lot of issues. They have had over the years. I will say, in general, I think they are getting better than maybe in the past years, but
What's the current tipping fee?
$47.50.
Well, they're increasing it, 47.50. What was it?
It was already increased to $47.50 last year.
Oh, so this is last year's rate. Okay.
I'm just pointing out that they increased $47.50.
What was it before that, Kurt? Do you remember offhand?
$45.50, but I think that $45.50 was actually their first increase in like years. So they kept it pretty low for a long time.
If they've set it up now, it's going to increase every year through inflation or something like that. So they've got that set up. So,
Well, yeah, for years when the rates were low, I mean, they claimed that they were low because they were setting aside money, they had everything covered, and then suddenly they discovered that that was not, in fact, true. They didn't have. Somehow the money kind of disappeared.
I think they had some internal problems before that,
Yeah.
maybe, so I don't know if they really knew what the heck was going on. Now
So-
they might be coming out of the dark now in the last several years.
Yeah, and I think that's basically, I agree, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to kind of get the ship upright again.
Okay, so solid waste, any other questions or concerns on solid waste? The board members that aren't present will still have an opportunity to address this when we have a wrap-up session, so, and I imagine they'll be watching this on YouTube, so they can see what was asked and what
So
was
the-
answered.
So the one question that came up was, would we consider leaving it at 1475 and not reducing it? Okay.
Okay, so we will move to water next. Doesn't matter if you start with water, well, water is directly related to wastewater, so we might as well start with water first.
Okay, water.
I really want right now.
Water, there haven't been any huge changes, but I'm going to say what's having the most impact on next year's budget are a couple of things. Number one is every year I use certain numbers as to come up with a budget. For example, things like customer numbers in the water system, for example, I use, this year I'm planning on 1,938 equivalent meters, 2259 equivalent line sizes, and 46 fire lines. And then a number, the key driver to the budget is, the last number I plug in is essentially the user charge. So that particular line item, which is, what is that line item called? Sales. Okay, so next year I use that equivalent meter size, which is what the base charge is based on. That number comes up to $162,792. So the big unknown is how much water are we going to sell? And this year was a pretty wet number. So this year, and of course, I don't know how much we've sold yet. I only know the information through August, but it was a significant drop from what I had anticipated. So then next year, I'm assuming that we will not have an extremely rainy year, but it could happen. So next year, I'm figuring on 89,500,000 gallons of water. So that's how I come up with that particular number. And in terms of expenses, again, the biggest change has actually occurred down at the near the end, the replacement and improvement, which is like one number, but it's actually comprised of two different numbers. So, for example, water system replacement cost last year was $205,583. This year, the system replacement cost is $222,404, and that's because of the infrastructure that we constructed during the year. So it's in addition to the system. So that number went up. The other number would be the replacement. Actually, that is that's the number I just talked about. The other number would be the improvements cost. So what happened there is last year, that number was $128,200. And this year, the number is $165,950, which is a significant increase. So what happened there is, first of all, I deleted stuff that we had completed, which was basically the South Vandenboom water main. Okay, so that was $50,000 that came out. But what I did is because, the years are passing and the things on the improvement list that were high priority, still need to be done. So, for example, the first three items on the list, the generator, motor control center, and the PLC update and upgrades, I reduced that to 5 years instead of 10 years, therefore increasing the annual cost. And the board's expressed concern over the disappearance of the replacement improvement monies that have been set aside. But that's because we have been, in fact, spending those monies, at a greater rate than we've been setting them aside. So that's the fund that's decreasing. So what I'm suggesting is we need to build that fund back up. And I still put off these projects as long as I can, but we're getting down to, some of these things have to be done, sooner rather than later. So those three items right there would be like $250,000 that, probably be done sooner than 5 years. So those are the primary changes in the budget. So the debt service fee is actually based on, you might recall last year, we actually started charging the entire amount of all the debt service in one number, which is a separate charge. And that is going up 10 cents basically next year. Basically just because of all the payments that are due.
Based on what?
The actual service debt for next year.
What changed there to drive that up?
Because they're not all exactly the same every year. Basically the only debt service we had was essentially the well system previously. And that, it was one number, so it's a 20-year debt, but I straight lined it in terms of, you know, I believe that was $280,000 a year. Now, we are due to have, I believe, we got one more payment on one of the debts next year, will be the last one. I believe that was the Harglow one. Willis, is that correct?
Yeah, you got one more year in that one. Then you got one coming up in 2020, I think it is, too.
So next year, it would probably go down, assuming we don't have another debt service.
As far as expenditures and that, on your Cox pumping station,
Yep.
it's noted on the very bottom, it does not have a backup power source or motor.
Yep.
What do you do in that case if power goes out there? Something happens that you need a backup.
Right now, it's not a huge issue because we normally don't use the Cox pump station. Because with our well system, we're actually serving two large districts with the wells now. And only one district is being served by the purchased city water. So it's gravity. But there are going to be times, and and I don't know when that's going to occur, but if we have to take, for example, in fact, this is going to happen, but I don't think next year, but year after next, we got to take out the Northwoods tank for maintenance.
Right.
Interior and exterior painting, which is on the improvement list there, $88,000. But also that's the estimated cost of actually doing the work. But during that period, we'll have to, supply water by pumping. So. And there are other, we've had instances in the past where we've had even construction that's near that border between districts, where we had to actually, take mains out of service during construction and pump during that period. So,
What's the reason we supply the Northwood Reservoir from the Cox? Is there any reason we can't supply that from the well field?
it is supplied from Cox. It is supplied from the well field. That's what I said. That's why we're not using the Cox pump station normally, because everything except Cox is supplied by the well field.
What's your biggest concern, Kirk, in the future for this coming year?
Well, the biggest concern I've got is, I would say, we really need to focus, and we have been focusing, but we haven't focused in terms of actually taking any action. And then I think we've all agreed that the Morgan Meadows and Mason's Bluff is the #1 priority. But every time we talk about it, it seems like it, it's more in the future, which would indicate it's not a priority, but it is a priority.
That end is not gonna grow until we do something about it, you know? Because the water source up there is,
Right. Well, and, you know, the thing is our groundwater source, the one that we have right now, the only one we have right now, is small. It's just a small aquifer, you know, it's only fed by basically rainfall from a small area. Okay, so we're not like some areas that have, it's huge. So,
well, some of
that means we need more than one source. Otherwise, we gotta go back to the city. So that's another case where if we have to go back to the city, that means not only in our, you know, our discount's gonna be running out at some point. We'll have to pay more for the water, but maybe even more importantly, we'll have to go back to pumping. So we have to pump from Cox to Northwoods then, 24/7.
we got a big investment out there, and basically, my understanding, the water that's there is held by, and if you put your hands on, in the rock. It's not, you know, you're not getting.
Oh, yeah. As a public supplier, we cannot hydrofrack. So you can frack for gas or anything else, but you cannot frack for public water. You can for private water. If you've got a single-family home, you can't get water, you can frack the rock all you want, although that could have an impact on us as well, you know. For example, at Mason's Bluff, we have a well there, it's not in use, well, it's in use for one customer,
House, yeah.
and that's the only one that's permitted by the health department. But there's a new house going up right now in Mason's Bluff that cannot connect to the water because we don't have a permitted system. Well, the system is permitted, but the well is not permitted. And plus, we don't have a pump station. But if that new house can't get water, they're gonna be fracking, okay? So that's gonna impact our supply. And that's common for this area. You know, that's why, obviously, the city went to the lake, because lots of water.
If I go back to my comment before, it's on page 591-4. It's item 569C. If I'm reading that right, it says that the water for the Northwoods Reservoir is drawn from the Cox Reservoir. My question is why can't we supply the Northwoods Reservoir from the well field?
Where was that again? 591?
591-4, 569C.
Is that in my,
Narrative, yeah.
okay. So what's your,
Well, back to my original question.
Yeah.
The question is why do we supply water to the Northwoods Reservoir from the Cox Reservoir? Can we not supply that from the well field?
we are, where does it say we're supplying from Cox?
Well, it says when
I'm
in
missing-
use, water is drawn from the Cox Reservoir and pumped to the Northwoods Reservoir, which supplies water to the Northwoods gravity and pump districts,
It's
Which-
under the water pumping station, which
under
is,
569C, which is, unless I'm reading something into
That's when in
that.
use, that's what I was just saying.
it's not in use right now. That pump station is not in use.
And so right now, we
I was
get
looking
the
up at
water for the
560,
Northwoods.
567. The water
Right now, we
reservoirs.
get the water from the Northwoods, for the Northwoods Reservoir from the well field.
Correct. That's when in use.
Via
Yeah.
Chapel Ridge. Well, if it wants to Chapel Ridge, it's gravity from Chapel Ridge to Northwoods.
Okay.
Basic pump water is actually just emergency right now. If we have to
Correct,
fill
yes.
Northwoods and we don't have the well field, we can fill it from Cox. But we don't do that right now. See, way back before we had the well field, Dave, that's what we used to do.
Mhm.
But since we got in the well field, we've filled Northwoods from Chapel Ridge.
Well, I guess what I would go back to then is maybe you can explain a little bit further, is you suggested that the reason we need to do the pumping at the pump at Cox was because of when we take the tank out of service at Northwoods, that we're gonna need to pressure pump that from the Cox tank. Did you say that? Or did I miss something?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, my question is why can't that come from where it comes from now? Why can't it come from the well field as opposed to Cox?
Well, it may, except for the fact that we're taking this district, the Cox, it used to be the Cox Pump District. It's now the Northwoods Tank District, Gravity District, okay? So, if you think that, it's basically we're losing the volume. So like normal operation, we probably could just bypass the tank, but we would still have a capacity issue. Like if we needed, more water, which happens, that's the purpose of a tank, is basically that is your peak demand, and, tanks are sized.
So we don't have,
certain areas.
we don't have the capacity at the well field to supply that?
Well, we do, but it's not the well capacity, it's the actual tank's capacity. So what I'm saying is, the district that's now served by the Cox tank, or not the Cox tank, I'm sorry, the Northwoods tank, is a pretty big district. So it includes from the Northwoods tank all the way back to here, basically. So basically, half or more than half of our commercial district. Okay, so if you remove that tank, okay, so then the other tank was not really sized for both districts. So,
Which other tank are we talking about?
Chapel Ridge.
How would you get maybe this will help, how would you get the water from the well field to the Cox tank?
Well, you can't put it in the Cox tank, because you can't mix water supplies, right?
Oh, you can mix water, our water supply we can, sure. That's the city that restricts it.
Well, it'd still be the same process, just like he was suggesting.
But can you get water from our well field to the Cox tank currently?
Yeah, you could,
That there was a
except
point-
you'd just be losing that capacity of the.
Well, I thought there was a point in the discussion that we didn't have the connection from the Northwoods tank to the Cox tank, or did we go ahead and do that in the last construction process?
Well, right, another change at the Northwood station, after we put in the well field, is normally we used to fill Northwoods only from Cox.
Right.
So we pump from Cox to the Northwoods.
Mhm.
And then from the Northwoods, we would pump continuously, because we didn't yet have, that was before we had the Chapel Ridge tank.
And that would pump to where?
Everything beyond, like north and west of.
Okay. 492.
Correct, yes.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a Northwoods pump district that's now served by the,
But my question is,
Northwoods.
can you pump from
Or-
Northwoods to Cox?
well, you don't have to, I mean, it's.
No,
it's
can
gravity.
you? And I think that's the question Dave is asking. Can you pump from the well water from Northwoods tank to the Cox tank? Can you pump that?
Directly
Mm-hmm.
from the tank?
Yes.
No, because it's still set up to be.
That's my point. You can't, the well water
Yeah.
cannot be pumped to the Cox tank.
My-
That's my point.
My question actually is you went through a scenario that we need to put this emergency pump system at the Cox tank. And,
Well, power.
okay, and the reason we need to do that is because when we take the Northwood tank off the line.
Well, that's one reason. I mean, there are lots of reasons. There's no standby power.
Yeah, the primary reason is that we pump from the Cox tank into the city. We serve everybody that lives west of Lincoln from our Cox tank. We pump to their tank and then they feed it. So we need the power there to ensure that that tank, it always maintains pump capacity. There's no power there now. You'll notice if you go to the Lincoln
Okay, so
tank,
it's not strictly a Northwoods tank problem that could be taken out of service to be refinished.
Right,
yeah, but if you look at the Lincoln tank, the city's Lincoln tank, they've got a portable generator stationed at that tank, just like they do at the pump station that serves the mountain tank on Grove Street. We don't have any power generation at Cox. So if the power's out, we can't pump it, and that's what the standby power's for.
And normally you don't have to pump it.
Correct.
Normally not.
Right.
All right.
So it's not as urgent as it used to be, because we do have the well system now as a normal supply.
Yeah, I hate
But the motor control is still, I
hate
mean,
to beat
that's,
that dead horse to
Sure.
death here. When you were going through your scenario and you were looking at the $100,000 cost for the generator, that was,
well, that was one of it, yeah. It's the motor control and also the SCADA.
okay,
Yeah.
but the reason you were using for that was because when we take the Northwoods tank offline to have it serviced,
Well, that was just an example, but yeah, that'd be one, yeah.
okay, but then we're gonna need the pump capacity, we're gonna need Cox to have to supply
Right.
the water to the Northwoods district.
Right.
Back to my original question, can't the Northwoods district be supplied from the well field?
Yes,
It is. That's the primary source for the Northwoods tank.
Yep.
So
I would,
then we don't need the
well,
Cox.
the whole point of backup power is for an emergency, okay? All right. So we can supply water, but what I'm saying is that there are certain emergencies that create water demand, like fires, okay? And just even things that aren't even necessarily emergency, but primarily emergency, okay? It doesn't have the capacity,
They're not a system emergency,
Correct.
but an external emergency.
right?
The,
And that's assuming, and I'm not talking about doing it for forever,
Long period of
just
time.
short periods of time.
But the Cox tank is one of our primary tanks for
Mhm.
pressure and for relief. Well, it's the primary tank.
I think what Dave is asking is, yes, you can supply the Northwoods District in a short time without the tank, but if you have a fire or a water main break, you won't keep up. It'll be a disaster.
You can't maintain maximum
No,
demand.
it'll be a disaster there. You'll drain the Chapel Ridge tank quick, and the wells won't keep up.
Yeah, and the real issue is maximum capacity that we have to meet, peak demand.
And if we don't
Right.
have pumps from Cox to feed that district, we're gonna have a big problem, so.
I guess one question that I would ask is on the estimate of 89,500,000, how did you come up with that estimated use when in 16 we only used 71 million, 71.9? And we're down this year, I know we're down.
Yeah.
Way down this year, but what's
Well-
where does the 89.5 projection come from?
Where are you at, Randy?
Well, Kirk had mentioned that, the projected revenue in 2018 is based on sales of 89,500,000 gallons. That was said. It's not in you're not going to see that anywhere in print. You've said it in the opening statement. And then my question is, what's that predicated on, since in 16, we only sold 71,900,000, and we're way down below that this
Where'd you
year.
get that number?
Off of page 59116, which is the purchases. That's the purchases page. But we purchased 71.9.
591.60.
Yeah, 16 up in the 2016 on the purchased amount.
Okay, well, this is not the sold.
No, I know it's not. That's why I'm asking, where does the projection of 89.5 come from? Is that combining other sources? This is the sold, this is what we purchased from the city.
Gallons, yeah.
Gallons, 71,929, 924.
Right, which is not the whole system.
And that's what I'm getting at. What are we gonna pump?
Well, what I'm basing it on is I did go back, actually. In 2014, we sold 83.5 million.
Okay,
2015, 87.3 million.
okay,
16.
total,
Yep. And 16, 94.2 million.
okay. So
And then
that's,
this year, through August, it's 58.4 million, which is less than anticipated. So
Right.
that's where it came up. You know, hopefully more than this year, but I'm still estimating less than 2016.
I mean, did you
So it
take
has been going up.
But did you take into consideration growth, like the Meyer coming on and the other aspects are coming on to get to that 89.5? That's my question.
Well, yeah, based on,
Okay.
I mean, basically increases have been pretty much on growth.
Okay.
And on this sheet, Randy, this
But
is
it
just.
is an estimation.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, it's definitely an
It's not a-
estimation, which could be
Well,
off
if
by,
we have another if we have another wet season next year,
Yeah.
it's going to be substantially less than that.
or
So
less development, or
Just trying to get
whatever.
the board thinking about that, is that we're making a projection predicated upon historical sales. This year was an anomaly. If we have another anomaly next year, we're not going to sell 89.5, which means the revenue will be down.
I don't understand when it comes to setting that rate, we change that every year's budget, why we don't look at a 5 or a 10-year average to.
Leave it there?
To set the rate and then leave it there and let it fluctuate year after year.
Well, we could do that.
Yeah, the only thing you'd have to take into consideration then is average cost increase, because you've got things that we don't control that like the BLP, you know, things like that impact labor contract commitments. That would be, it'd be easy to calculate what that is on average, what that roll-up is, and add that into that.
I mean, just when we're determining what the
Sure.
rate's gonna be for this year.
Well, that's what I'm saying, but with the rate, those things impact the rate, staffing and all that impact what the rate is. So if we could fairly easily calculate what the average of that increase has been and then adjust that figure, but yeah, I think you could do that,
Well,
sure.
it just seems like the big driver that makes that rate fluctuate year after year, some years it's up, some years it's
Volume.
down, is the volume.
It is.
Based on whether we had a wet season or not. I'm just suggesting that if we looked at a 5-year or a 10-year average, we could sidestep the whole wet season, dry season thing. We'd be traveling in the middle of the road someplace.
You could, basically what you'd be doing is you'd be setting a benchmark for a period of time, and then you'd adjust the benchmark, and, you know, with the only adjustment that you would make then in the budget process would be whatever happened to costs.
Right.
And 5 years kind of usually it's more typically done like 3 years. But it could be done. But there are some other variables, and I'm going to tell you a big variable is, things like, we know we're having development, okay, but that does vary from year to year. Sometimes that's a pretty big number, and sometimes it's not so big, you know?
Well,
So,
and timing, timing as well,
Right.
Whether they're fully constructed, partially constructed.
But that's all an estimate
But
anyway.
I mean, you have a valid point. You could very well do that. You could take a 3-year or a 5-year average and then adjust it at the end of that cycle. And in the interim, if you had a spike, like a 30% increase in health insurance that was going to impact the rate, then you would make an adjustment
Then
at that
honestly,
point.
you'd have to make adjustment, but it wouldn't be
Right.
an automatic adjustment every year based on all whether we had a dry summer or a wet summer. And
Well, you wouldn't only be
kind of
chasing.
forecast the development you're anticipating anyway. I mean, you should be able to forecast that out than just what we've got going this summer.
So you wouldn't have a up at 25 cents or 10 cents or 5 cents up in every
Yeah, we
year?
wouldn't keep jumping around. We could find a spot where it's comfortable to cover our bills, and some years we got a surplus, and some years we don't.
Right, but overall, you're pretty much steady. Was the
Well, then year to year, you can adjust that also based on your.
Well, you're
year.
not so much at the mercy of the weather at that point. Whether you have a dry season or a wet season, really doesn't determine what the rate is.
Well, and I don't know if everybody's looked at that report yet, but, you know, a big cost of a system is fire protection.
It is.
What?
Fire protection. So in other words,
Sizing of
that
pipes and
expense
pumps
is
and
there.
everything.
What's missing is the revenue to support that expense.
But the residents are already paying for that fire protection,
Correct.
both places, for the fire department and for the water. It's already-
Well, that's,
Cost is already.
yeah. What the heck was I looking for? Well, that's true, there is a consideration, both, you know, the fire department is funded by millage, the public works is funded by volume use.
Right.
So they're not necessarily the same. So you have a valid point that the residents that are paying the 2.5 mils, regularly paying the 2.5 mils on the assessment for fire,
Water.
and are also paying the water rate. In fact, that's the issue that's in Oakland County District or Circuit Court right now, addressing that. But there's that equity, the question of, is it an improper tax question? So that's what the Circuit Court in Oakland County is going to be addressing. But Kirk has a point as well. He's responsible to provide the fire flow, which means the size of the infrastructure that he's got in the ground is sized specifically to address that requirement to be able to serve, should one of those fire suppression systems go off. Obviously, that's a much bigger series of pipes and pumps than are required for residential. So how does that factor into the costs?
Yeah, and in the dark stores issue too, some of the businesses that take advantage of that have decreased their tax payments also, which
Well, that hurts the fire department.
hurts the
Yeah.
fire department. So that, takes that revenue down too.
I'd like to just see that we get away from the up and down, nickel, dime, quarter, or whatever, year by year. And then we reduce it, and then a couple of years we have to, what are you raising it for,
Well, I would
And
think
we
it
get a
would.
level ground and, people fix their budgets by that. And
Well, I'm not reducing it. You gave me that direction last year, so I'm not reducing it.
That's good.
Well, but I think what Pete's saying is that, where the board members hear the complaints is when it's down 50 cents this year and then you have to go up 20 cents next year. And why are you raising, because all that they remember is what the last rate was that they paid. They don't have the luxury of the sheet that you have, and I'm not finding it right now, but somewhere in your budget is the rate history.
Yeah, it's back.
Well, it makes us look more reactionary than planning.
Well, we are reactionary. We're reactionary to the weather at that point. Heck is that page? Is it in the miscellaneous or in the water budget? Miscellaneous, okay. Yeah, there, there's your rate history. Page 4, in the front, miscellaneous. So you can see, the volume, the average volume, how much per thousand, and then the base. The base has been pretty consistent right along, but the volume has gone up and down based upon external forces. Primarily. Primarily, it's the demand, the number of gallons sold. It's on page 4 under the miscellaneous section at the front of the book, Dave.
Mhm.
Yeah, to me, it'd make more sense if you could average it out and then year to year, it's not gonna change, but people can budget for that. And that'd probably be better to do. It's not gonna change that much year to year.
When I look at the $1.03 increase there, last year there was 2 increases to the people in that. And they come back with another one this year, and that, it's, for whatever reason, it's gonna create some, lots of discussion in that.
Well, there will, and, and realistically, what occurred there is that a project, a major project that was planned for the future got escalated, basically, and it got moved up, and the money came out of cash rather than out of the normal funding structure, so it depleted the reserves.
What happens if we can level that out is, it helps everything. These aren't the only changes that we have to deal in our life, you got library, then you got some other fees, or road and everything like that, so as much as we can keep their budgets a level keel, they can adjust for it.
They all get that water bill every month.
Yeah.
Maybe a quarter off for solid waste. That'll help.
Yeah, well. Then I looked at debt service, 654, you're increasing it by 10 cents. And you're going back to the actual revenue in that. And, the question I have is, why do we need to increase it?
Well, again, because last year we switched to funding all the debt service in one number.
Yep.
Okay, well, that's the way it was when I was funding it before. I was funding the water project, which is a different payment every year. But I equalized it, so it was like one number every year. That number did not change. It only changed because the customer number changes, okay? So if you've got more
I didn't
customers.
follow that at all. One hand you said it's not changing, but it did change. It went up 10 cents. What drove that? What made it go up 10 cents?
We've had it, what I said was last year, we made the change to add all the debt service into this one line item, okay?
Which item within that line item changed so you had to raise it by 10 cents?
The total, I think there are 4, is that right?
There's 4 or 5 items.
I think there are 5 items.
Yeah.
You can combine 5 of them.
Most of them, you make 2 payments a year. That comes up with a number, okay? So whatever the number is, that's what I'm charging. Divided by the equivalent, in case of water debt, I believe it's line size. So that number changes every year.
Okay, way back 6 months ago, requested and we got a breakdown of what appeared on the water bill. And I don't see that here with this budget. That would be representative of what those changes were and why they went up. It's just easier to understand without going back through those spreadsheets and trying to make head or tails out of that. It's easier to understand if you've got that one-page summary of this is what it was last year, this is what it is proposed for 2018, and you should be able to go look at that, and $14.60 is spread across 5 items that drive that debt service fee, and we should be able to see where the money went, where the extra 10 cents went. I realize we're only talking about 10 cents, but we're talking about the principle, because it applies not only to that, but it applies to everything else, is where did the 10 cents go when I look at that water bill?
Yeah.
And if everything went up across the board, fine. Then everything on the breakdown of that debt service fee should show a few pennies here and a few pennies there, which is easier to understand than just a general 10-cent increase with no explanation of where it came from or what drives it. And it's as simple as just taking the water bill and explaining where all the dollars that we collect on that water bill, where they go. What generates that money. That summary sheet we got last, I don't remember when we got it, it was the spring. Explained the last rate increases we were looking for that went from what they were to what they currently are this year. And it would be nice to see you add another column to that shows the 3 rate changes and what's changing to drive that price up. Or in the case of the water use, what's changing to drive it down?
So you're saying in the 5 columns, 2 cents or 3 cents and 1.5, and so. each
Or
one
if
of
we've,
them.
or if we've added a completely new column. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just easier to understand if you can see where that money actually came from and where it's going. And it's easy, that makes it easier for everybody. It makes it easier for the residents to understand if they've just got a one-page sheet to look at and see where their money on their bill is going to. And the difference between the 2017 budget and the post-2018 budget, what's the change? I mean, it's not like you're developing anything new. All that information is laying there. It's just a matter of putting it on a one-page summary.
Sure.
On the same subject, when you go back to, on page 591-8, when you look at the debt service fee on that, and you look at the original budget for 17, then you look at the amended budget, and you look at the actual through June, which was 184,944, you double that, that comes to 369,888, which is under the estimated budget. Then I look at the request for this year, which is actually less than the estimated total for this year. So those figures, to me, I have a hard time comprehending.
Well, the 2 payments per year are not the equal payments.
I understand that, but when you look at the combined amounts
Yeah.
and that,
Well, that's where I'm coming from myself, is the the fees going
591.
up 10 cents, but
Page 8?
the recommended
Oh, I
amount
don't
is
see it.
actually going down.
I don't see it either. What page are you on, Early?
391-8,
591-8, right?
591-8.
We're at on the page, though.
Yeah, what are you looking at?
Item 654, debt service fee.
Okay, right there.
Is that right, Aaron?
Right.
Oh, up here, okay.
If you go back to our monthly,
But that's the revenues, though.
Yeah.
that's the revenue, right. The revenue is
What's coming in?
coming in, that's what you're gonna be looking at, because that's what you're talking about, that 10 cents is increased revenue in that.
Well, that's what you look at. You see it's a 10-cent increase, but you see the department request is actually lower than the estimated total for this year.
Right. When you take the total from through June, you double that 184, it doesn't eat the estimated total of 396, you only kind of, so.
What you should be looking at, the number is the amended budget, the 396, 110.
Okay,
That's a total of all the debt payments last year. And we're working off the schedules that we get from the banks. Okay? This year, the number's 395, 777.
Okay, if it's, I guess, if I can tag on to what Treasurer Johnson is saying, is if it's less this year in 2018, then why is the fee going up 10 cents?
Is it going up or it's going down?
No, it's going from 1450 to 1460.
Oh, okay. 10 cents.
On 591.2.
Yep.
10 cents.
What probably changed is the number of equivalent line sizes. Be my guess.
It would be nice to know that.
Just a,
Well, that would be another
Column.
column, Dave,
Well, and I guess.
because there are more factors, you know.
I go back to my original complaint, it's one thing to look at these two numbers and have to go through this spreadsheet and dig those two numbers out. We shouldn't have to go through this spreadsheet and dig all this out. It should be in a summary form. And the only reason you'd be back in this spreadsheet is to verify some of what you're reading on the summary if you don't understand it. I mean, the whole budget process would be so easy if we just had some summaries that explained all this.
Be a narrative of a narrative. Yeah. Attached to the narrative, a summary sheet, right, Dave?
Yeah, just the same thing we did last year when we explained the bill and what's on it.
Well, we could work on that for
Sure, we
next
can do that.
time.
Well, I thought we had worked on that for this time. And here we are, and it's not here.
even looking at the revenue through June, knowing you make only 2 payments a year, so you made 1 payment, so you got 184,944, you double that, that does not equal the estimated total that you're supposed to hit.
Because the 2 payments a year are not equal payments.
Okay, goes back to what Dave said, it comes kind of a attachment, so we know what's going on, because when you sit down and start playing with figures and they don't come out right, it generates a lot of questions.
So it would be helpful would be update the one form that we had before.
Yeah.
Yeah, just add another column so that you show the 2016, the 2017, and now what you're proposing for 2018, just so you can see where it's headed and why.
Yeah.
And not just for water, but for all of the things that are driven by those rates and debt service fees, and whether it be wastewater or whatever we're talking about.
So we already got the form, so we just have to update it and add the other ones in.
Right. Yep.
They can do the same for wastewater and
Yeah.
same for solid
And actually,
waste.
the,
Well, when we were going by the back of and we were just taking the back of the bill and flipping it over and showing what they were paying on their bill, and if it was an itemized debt service fee on the back of that bill, you broke it out so that you knew what debt service you were paying for, and if it was 4 items or 5 items or 10 items, and it showed how much of that dollar was going to each one of those services.
Okay, if you look at, under the miscellaneous section, under page, no, that's wastewater, it's not water. The base fees didn't change. Wastewater base fees changed. Water didn't.
okay, and the equivalent line size, which is that debt service number, that's what it's based on,
Mm-hmm.
the debt divided by the equivalent line sizes.
I have no idea where you're at right now.
On a different sheet.
It's not on there.
No, he
It's on
did.
one of his worksheets.
But that's why it went up, because the equivalent line sizes went down. So fewer equivalent lines paying for the debt.
That's what I was looking for here.
But for us to try and work this through and figure that out, it just,
Can't do it
you
now.
can't do it in that. Because we're not on it on a day-to-day basis in that, so.
Sure.
Now we've kind of hit that one. How about looking at 692 other revenue? I think we got some typos in there.
Well, them are the easiest ones to fix. 592?
690.
672,
Oh, excuse me.
under the amended budget and the estimated total. Original was 21,000, and amended is 174,000, and actual 17, and the estimated total 174,000, so.
I'm sorry, what was that line item again?
672, other revenue. Can't be just mine.
Nope, it's not.
Page 591, 8.
Has to be a transfer in from somewhere for that one.
What are we looking at?
672.
Other revenue.
Oh, I know what that was. That was, the big change was that the sale of the property?
Yep. We sold the buildings, the old hall, that's
Township Hall,
their portion.
that was the revenue.
There's no place in here that refers back to as to why that big change took effect that I could find.
No, no, it's not referenced in there, but that was the revenue spike.
Big, yes.
Probably should have been referenced, like
Should
sale.
have been a note somewhere, a
Yeah.
reference. That's all about.
Then it would make more sense.
Well, it probably was in the 2017 budget narrative that occurred in 17. This is the 18 budget narrative.
Well, I guess when you're looking at it, you look at what 2017 looked like, then you go at the department request, which those are 25,553, which there's just a big disparity between there unless you know that's where it actually came from.
Mm-hmm.
Like audit reports, you have a little number going back down to a comment somewhere in the end. A lot of it just takes a plain sentence.
I thought I had it here, but it's not.
Although, so Lois, you've got this, actually, I think that was a budget number? Correct, yeah. But then when the actual audit came through, that number included the 152,456, which was gain on sale of asset.
That's all fine and good, it's just that when we're going through these figures, all of a sudden this jumps out and you have no way to go back and do any analysis anywhere. And I've looked at enough audit where they just note something.
So what would probably not be correct would be the estimate total for this year? Because that would include the 152, which was actually last year. So that would be the typo, if you want to just call it typo. Although it was in the budget, it was in the budget. It was in the amended budget. It was not in the original budget.
Okay, so we have an introduction to the water fund here, and there's still a lot of questions, I understand.
I'd like to make one more comment.
Okay, and trying to move us along here.
I know, but it's not gonna be easy.
Well, we're gonna have more sessions, so.
591.14, water system improvements.
14.
Okay,
All right. The water main for Brookton Road, as near as I can tell, that is to increase the water flow and pressures at the end of that main because it's a dead-end main, is that right?
Well, yeah, I mean, basically, there's a gap in the main there.
Okay, and this is to connect it?
Yep.
And the Mason Bluff wells and pumping station, that's to increase
It's to get water out there, basically.
Increase the development possibilities at Mason's Bluff? Yes?
Well, that would be a side effect, but the reason that we would have the project would be to obtain an additional source of water.
But we're obtaining an additional source of water that really isn't worth a whole lot.
You know, it's only 110 gallons per minute there.
And we're doing it at a cost of $590,000, if that's where we're. the
Well, that
reason.
really only becomes viable if we finish phase 2 of the water project.
Yeah, it's a
Which
combination
gets
of
back
both.
to my comment that I was working up to. Back in December of last year, it was the first meeting in December, the board discussed, and we had a consensus on it, that we need to see a 5 and a 10 and a 20-year plan for our water systems, where we plan to be. And then our capital improvement programs can be addressed on how they affect that end game. And I don't see, because we have an issue coming up that we keep dancing around and we've never touched, and that's our contract at 2025. And we don't know what we're gonna do when we get there, and we're just plodding along and not really worrying about it right now. But we still haven't seen a master plan, if you will, of our water and sewer infrastructures and where they're gonna be in specified number of years out. And then when we start looking at capital improvement programs, which is the Brookton Water Main and the Mason Bluff wells, you can apply that to the end game and how we get, why are these necessary to get us where we want to be in 10 or 15 years from now? And so we keep coming in with these, the Brookton Main extension, and tie those two together. And the Mason Bluffs. I mean, Mason Bluffs is easy to understand if you realize that it is one of the phases that gets us out to Morgan Meadows. But we don't have a plan. We don't know when we're going to get out to Morgan Meadows. We don't even know if we're actually going to get out to Morgan Meadows. Mason's Bluff makes a lot of sense if there was a plan in place to say that you're going to get to Morgan Meadows in 5 years. Then Mason's Bluff makes all kind of sense for $590,000 because it fits into the end game.
Well, we had a plan, Dave.
Pardon?
We had a plan. We had a 20-year plan, a master plan,
Uh-huh.
and then we actually had a project.
And
The board decided they want to go forth with it.
then if we're not going forth with that, and if we don't have a master, I mean, if the board decides they're not going to go forth with a 20-year plan, then we just need to adjust our 20-year plan to something the board will go for. We need to forecast out 5, 10, and 20 years how far where we're going to be, what our water system and wastewater system is going to look like
Without,
any number of years out, and what our plan is. The board needs to accept that plan. And if they didn't accept the first 20-year plan, we need to come up with a new 20-year.
Well, we've got new 20. The last one was in 2013. The board did accept it.
Then how does these capital improvement projects,
That's basically where it comes from. I don't just make this stuff up.
how do these capital improvement programs fit into that?
Again, that's exactly where they came from.
I think where Dave's coming from is the board's last position was, not for at least the next 5 years will you be considering the the phase 2 of the water project.
Right.
So why are we budgeting $59,000 each year instead of retaining that in the budget and keeping the rates down?
Well, and we went out and spent money that we really didn't have to spend when we did South Vandenboom,
True.
and we did Ontario. We increased the size of that main in Ontario, and it was all ahead of schedule money. We knew we were going to do it someday, but we just jumped in and did it early. I personally think it's time to say, maybe we need to pull it back a little bit and wait until we get some of this stuff paid off, become a little more solvent, come up with a little more solid plan as far as what this township's going to look like in 5, 10, and 20 years out. Have the board sit down and say, yes, that's what it's going to look like, because I remember what the manager just mentioned is that the board hadn't decided to move forward with that. And they haven't decided that that's what we're going to do before our contract expires in 2025 with the city. We need to have a plan. And this stuff needs to fit into the plan, and just because it just seems that we don't have that end game plan figured out yet, and the board hasn't come along and said, yes, that's what we're gonna do, let's move ahead. And then you set all these capital improvement programs in place, and this is how we're gonna get there. But we're still got the capital improvement programs in place, but we don't really have an end game.
Well, what you're referring to is a progress chart, basically, like a construction progress chart. By such and such a date, we're gonna have this done. By such and such a date, we're gonna have this done. So you have a graphic. But that predicates the board taking a position of saying we're going to do X, Y, or Z within the next 7 years, 5 years, 8 years, whatever, and then that gives Kirk the time frame to say, all right, to do that, I need this $590,000, so in year X, we need to start putting this, so you can track it.
But from what I can see, we're basing that $590,000 expenditure on something that the board really hasn't decided we're doing yet. And to spend $590,000 on Mason's Bluff makes sense if you're gonna tie it into Morgan Meadows, and if it's gonna be moving us towards a little water independence when our contract expires. But it doesn't make a lot of sense if we're gonna spend $590,000 just to improve the water situation at Mason's Bluff, if we never move forward with Morgan Meadows. So I would think the first thing we need to do, and it's been 11 months now since we've talked about that, is to come up with a plan and what our infrastructure is going to look like in defined years, and then we need to break that plan down as to how we're going to get there. And we seem to be moving ahead, spending money to get someplace we haven't decided we want to be yet.
Well, there was a plan and there was a decision, and you know, we were gonna do it, and then if a board changes its mind, that you change your mind, okay?
Well, I think what Kirk's proposing here isn't spending it, it's putting the money aside, but again, the question is, you know, if the board's not going to be taking an action, then the last action you took was to put it out 5 years, basically, probably not within the next 5 years.
Well, and that was a maybe.
Yeah, well, but the question then is, should we be putting that $590,000 away at $59,000 a year for the next 10 years, or is that a developer cost?
Right.
You know,
Well, Morgan Meadows is not gonna be a development cost, I can tell you that right now.
Well, nobody's decided they're going to do Morgan Meadows yet.
The board had decided they were gonna do Morgan Meadows.
And then they backed away from it.
In fact, we had a low-interest loan and $1 million grant.
Well, I understand, but they backed away from that, so that's
Right,
not on
that's
the
all I'm
table.
saying.
That's not on the table anymore. And the last action the board took was, it's not gonna be on the table for at least 5 years.
Right. All I'm suggesting is that if we don't have a clear-cut plan as to when we're going to do Morgan Meadows, then how can we decide when it's necessary to do Mason's Bluff? And how can we decide when it's necessary to start tying all these systems in? Because Mason's Bluff is not important if you're not doing Morgan Meadows in the foreseeable future.
Well, we discussed before about where the township is gonna go. Okay, we need residents in here to pay taxes to support all the other things that we have. And we need water up in that area of 492 in order for that area to grow. I thought we all talked about that, you know, the last several years. We have to give them water up there because they can't get water. And we need a tax base.
It was discussed that that's what we need, but nobody made the decision that we need to move forward with it.
Yeah, it's a chicken and egg issue. You want the 30 to 40, whatever number of home sites developed in Mason's Bluff. You want that on the system because they become water and sewer users, they pay taxes, X, Y, and Z, it's places for people to live. To make that happen, they have to have water. And there is no water, sufficient water available there now. There is a new owner for the properties who's trying to do some development with the limited water that there is there now. On the other side of the coin, to provide the system, we need to finish Phase 2, which is the Morgan Meadows project, which is about a $5 million project or a little more than that. And right now, there is not the financial capacity for the township to do that. We don't have the revenue stream to support our portion of what that funding would be, even if we were to get DEQ funding. So the board basically put the brakes on, at least for right now, pending several other things that are happening, the dark stores issues, everything else, to determine where we need to put the money that we have available. Should it be into matching DWRF funds, or should it be into operating systems?
Well, and I would suggest that if we're going to collect $590,000 to do something like Mason's Bluff, we might be better off to spend our $59,000 a year to replenish the fund that we dipped into to do South Vandenboom and to do Ontario Street ahead of time.
And that's the point that we're at in this budget process.
Right.
If the board members, following these discussions that we have and following the public hearing, decide we're going to put a moratorium on that, we're going to keep that $59,000 a year in
Pay it
his
off.
fund to replenish what was spent on the two projects that were accelerated because of other projects that were happening, which made sense, cost less doing it that way. That's a board decision. And the board then would tell Kirk, just like you did last year, don't reduce rates. Don't put that money away yet until we make a decision on what we're doing with Phase 2.
And I would suggest that the first thing we need to do before we can move in any direction is we need to come up with a plan.
Yep,
And we
like,
don't have a plan.
like, what we don't have is we've got the plan and the design for Phase 2, but what we don't have is an implementation plan.
Right.
And if the board coming out of this budget discussion says, okay, we're not going to do it in the next 5 years, but in year 7, we're going to start putting money away on this. Now, he's then got,
Then you
The
decide
time-
when you need to spend the
and
$590,000.
you've now got barely 8 or 9 years to that point to implement the plan, so that's when you put your phase plan in, start putting the money aside.
And that's all I'm suggesting. We need to
Okay.
take a little longer look at it so that we can break it down into more bite-sized pieces, but to just keep,
Well, essentially, that's what you're doing. Like this $59,000 a year, okay, assuming you approve the budget. $59,000 a year is basically going into the improvements
Fund.
pot, okay? And the reason I didn't put Mason or Morgan Meadows on there, because that is a number one priority, is because there's no way in hell we're gonna set aside money to pay for Morgan Meadows.
Can't do it, yeah.
So that's gonna be a different source of funding. I could still put it on here, and I could put a cost associated, but that wouldn't be going into the rates.
and that is what I'm suggesting that we need, is we need to know, the board needs to come to a decision, are we gonna do Morgan's Meadow, and how is that gonna attach all the way down so that we have our system all connected? What's gonna be the cost? What's the possible sources of funding for that? So that we can start budgeting for it, and
I
this
agree with you.
is what we're doing, so we can start budgeting for it now.
I agree with you 100%.
Instead of applying it to Mason's Bluff, I mean, maybe there's someplace better we can put that money in until we got the whole picture set in front of us and everybody says, yep, that's what we're gonna do, then we really can't figure out where we wanna apply those funds.
Ernie?
I think the direction you're going is great, but I think there's one step I think we have to also look at is, where do we think the development of the township is going to be in the next 5 to 10 years?
Sure.
And that will be where we want to go. Now, we want to probably get the planning people involved with what they know. What do you see in the future coming through? Because that's going to dictate where we want to go at the same time, too. So we want to go up 492, is that where it's going to go? Fine, but it's going to, do we see something happening in another portion of the township that we should be concerned with, too? I don't know.
I guess that's my point, is this,
Yeah.
we've been discussing this on and off for 11 months, and we're still arriving at the budget for 2018, and we still don't have a plan.
Right, and I can tell you that with the developers that we talk to, if the board makes a commitment and says, 7 years from now, we are going to begin Phase 2 of the water project, or 5 years, or 3 years, or whatever it is, that will impact the development in that area, because once there is water up on 492 that far, there are several hundred acres that would be developable for residential uses.
I think that's, from what you just said, if we can start looking at that as a potential there, then you can start making your plans for the future then. Like Dave said, start laying it out.
Right.
and that.
Then that's all I'm saying is then, so on a map in 10 years, we should show Morgan Meadow well fields in there, and we should show it connected. And then there should be a price tag attached to it. And then we need to break it down and divide it by 10, for lack of a better word.
Sure.
So we know how much money we need to be finding. And obviously, Morgan Meadows is not going to be paid for through money from fees and paid for it ahead of time. You're going to have another source of
Be
money.
financed.
But you need to have some idea of what that source of money is.
Well, the source of money would be, basically, it would have to be tied around either a federal or a state grant of funds that would fund it to be repaid by ratepayers.
And if you decide that's the way, the board decides that's the way it's going to go, it will be a debt service fee,
Right.
Correct.
then we need to look long and hard at getting rid of the debt service fee that we have.
Correct.
So we're not strapping the residents with another $20 a month to pay for that water on top of what they're paying. And that needs to be part of our planning,
Yep.
is paying them off early if you have to, but get rid of the debt service fee so that we can start moving forward with a larger project. But first thing you got to do is the board and the residents have to buy in on the concept.
And depending upon what the time frame is that the board looks at, there may be several years that you would not have to allocate aside this roughly $59,000 that could impact rates.
And I guess what I would see happening is you approve this budget, and the next thing we see is estimates in front of us to put a water main in on Brookton Road, because the budget was approved. And I'm not in favor of putting a water main in on Brookton Road when it doesn't really apply. We haven't really taken a look at it and see how it applies to our overall plan.
Yep.
Same as I'm not in favor of putting in $590,000 at Mason Bluff if we don't have a plan to take us farther than that, and we don't right now.
What I'd like to see is, and I've talked to one developer and about the future of the area, and that it'd be interesting to have several of them come in and talk and just, well, how do they see it? I mean, it's their business to do this, you know? They
Well,
really-
I don't think there's any doubt if you put water out and sewer out 492, that's where the development's going.
Well, that's no, we can't go there because you got gullies, so you have to go the trend. The easiest one is to go down 492. You go towards Nagani, you know, I mean, look at the property there. That's more business, the way everything's going. And we have limited sources to go. Which way can we go? If we want to go that way like that, get a cost, you know.
Well,
What
and
can
it
we do?
also depends on what kind of development the board wants to see.
Exactly.
If you want to see residential development, then 492 is the direction to go.
Right.
If you want to see more commercial development, then it's north
Right, north
of
and
US
west.
41 and west on the side, somewhat restricted by terrain. But there are pockets of developable property. But from the long-term stability of the township's financial base, residential is the way to go. It's not commercial. Commercial does not generate that much in terms of revenue. They're not large water users, they're not large wastewater users, not large solid waste users. And taxes are fluid, let me put it that way. At least currently they are.
Yeah,
And-
well, in
terms-
And that may be changing.
All I'm suggesting is when we sit down at the budget and start taking a look at it, there shouldn't be any question as to why these funds are being, and how they apply to our long-term plan.
Right.
Which, there's nothing but questions right now as to how they apply and if they really apply.
Well, the budget is a planning document, just as much as anything else is, and the budget that, you know, the budget proposals that you have before you are predicated upon current positions that the board has taken.
Should be a one-year
To-
snapshot of a 10-year program.
It should be, that's correct. So, out of the budget work sessions, that would be the kind of direction that would be in a consensus budget, is that we're either going to leave in this projected amount for Mason's Bluff, or we're going to pull it out and leave it in the budget until the board makes an action on Phase 2 of the water project. You know, so I mean, those are the kinds of decisions that come out of these discussions.
We just did it with with the recreation. We just did it with the roads, and we had a plan, what we wanted to achieve in X amount of years. And So I guess we have to take a look at this and let's do the same thing.
Well, you would approach the phase two of the water project in the same manner. I mean, we have the project, Kirk's
Right.
right. I mean, we have the project designed. We have the only thing we would have to do is update cost to current costs
Right.
for current materials and things such as that. They fluctuate up and down. But the plan itself, the design is there, the program is there. What's not there is the starting date. You know, and if once we have a picture of what that actual starting date is, then Kirk can put together that plan that by such and such a date, it has to be submitted for funding, by such and such a date, it has to be approved by the DEQ if that's the direction we're gonna be going. Construction bidding has to happen by such and such. Construction starts here, takes this long.
I suggest we need to take it out just a little bit farther than a starting date. We need to know, when do
Oh,
we
yeah,
see
money.
Morgan Meadows tied in? When is the completion date, and
Yeah.
back it up from there?
And that would be the target. It's gonna take, what, 5 years? It's a 5-year project from beginning to end, roughly?
Well, not necessarily 5 years. I mean, it depends. It would take, a couple of years to get the funding.
But then construction and actually getting it in place, I'm going back to what we did with the original well
Yeah, well, that was with a
project.
bad contractor. It was a 2-year project, but,
Yeah, so,
And we are what? We are in, I hate to keep blowing the siren here.
oh, yeah,
but-
it's coming,
But
20,
we're 7 or 8
25.
years away from our contract
Yeah, and that's what,
expiring, and whatever we're gonna do, because our chances of negotiating a reasonable contract is based upon our position to have other options. If we
Yeah.
have no other options, then whatever the rate is what the rate is, and we're gonna have to pay it.
yeah, the
Out
contract,
the window.
well, the contract is in place. The contract's a perpetual contract. What's terminating is the favored rate.
Right.
The favored rate terminates.
That will impact
That
everything.
will impact the cost of the residents, it's the discount rate. And absolutely, yes, Kirk and I have been saying this for years. By the time that date comes, we need to have our own as total water source as possible by the time that date comes in, and that's finishing phase two. And that's what the board needs to look at, and realistically, yes, we've got some challenges right now because of accelerated projects that the road commission has done, that we've done ourselves with the road project. The dark stores issue impacted our ability to come up with the matching funds for such a sizable project. And we need to look at that, and within the next 2 years, we have to start it if we're gonna do it.
I think when we put off Mason's Bluff, I think we said 2020, we had to make a decision by, because the time.
Yeah, it gave you
frame
5
for doing-
years. Yep.
For doing everything had to be done.
I gave you 5 years, so that's 2 years from now.
But I just don't like being held up by, say, the city come back and we have to negotiate and the rate might be astronomical, that we don't have any other sources.
Well, in
We have
fact-
sources, well, we got Nagani gonna put the water pipe down to the plant down there, put a
Well, but that's still
generator thing. There are options that we might have.
yeah, I mean, connecting with Nagani is certainly an option, but that's an expensive option as well.
yeah, we've already looked at that.
Oh, it is an expensive
Well, look
option.
at all the
We
options.
don't really have a point to negotiate with anybody from, because we don't have a plan. And until you have a plan, it's not a matter of, do you have the plan finished? Do you have a plan in place that you could realistically complete that drives everybody to the bargaining table to come up with a little
Yeah.
earlier and a little better negotiation?
Yeah, we have a shovel-ready plan. What we don't have is a shovel-ready date.
Right.
We don't have shovel-ready money at this point.
Well, and that's
And we
part
have
of,
to put
that's
it on
part of the
paper.
date. But, but developing the plan isn't dependent upon having the money now. Developing the plan is having a time frame, saying by this date, we need to be ready to connect.
Yes, yes.
And that connection would include the Mason's Bluff piece. So that would, and that's always been part of this project, was coming through there to pick up that small well that's there, but mainly for the pumping station that's there to get to the chapel tank.
Well, and you could, it would be easy enough just to say that you want to have Morgan Meadows and Mason Bluff done and tied into our system by 2025.
Absolutely.
And you know the cost of that already. Obviously, there's going to be inflation in there, but you know the cost.
Yep.
And so you can anticipate what that's going to cost the residents in a debt service fee.
Right.
So is there any way that we can mitigate that by getting rid of some of our other debt service fee earlier?
Absolutely, yes.
So that they're not seeing such an impact on their budgets?
Yes. That's all
But not
part,
knowing all the numbers, and, I mean, it's easy enough to forecast how many dollars we're gonna need to come up with and what the probable cost is gonna be on an annual basis to the township.
I do.
And as soon as you do that, it's easy enough to decide what it's gonna do in their debt service charge, and therefore, how much we could reduce their debt service charge by doing things like this $590,000 and $170,000, if some of that was applied to get rid of some debt
Sure.
service charge earlier, so that when we kicked our phase 2 in for a 2025 completion, that we didn't have all this debt service charge hanging over us.
yeah, that's true, yes.
It goes back to a plan.
Yeah, because
Which
if the current debt
Goes back to a
retirement,
board,
if the current debt retirement is gonna be gone in 7 years, you have after year 7, then you have opportunity for more debt service without impacting the current rate. If you have a
But if
plan.
it doesn't go away for 7 years, that means they're gonna be paying this plus.
Yeah, you don't want to, I don't think it would be palatable for the residents to pay a double
Let me
debt
tell you what a
retirement.
comment one of the residents told me. He said, Beauty says, I'm all for the roads, recreation and stuff like that, but he said, don't you think someone else could pay for it after I'm gone, instead of me trying to pay for everything right now? So you stop and think about that, you know.
that's
Wait.
called the kick the can down the road philosophy.
Exactly. But it was just,
Well, there are
Made
some
up my mind.
decisions the board can make that would relate to what you're talking about. For example, the Trowbridge Sewer Project, that was a big project, okay? We got some grants, but it was mainly, just like the Drinking Water Revolving Fund loans, it was a low-interest loan essentially, with grants attached to it. But the debt service fee was set, and we didn't change it. And we paid it off in, I think, early by 6 years, maybe?
Yeah.
Subsequent projects, different board, different philosophy, which is basically they recognize we need to pay the debt, but as growth occurred, okay, the per person cost would go down. And that's the way we've been operating ever since. So if you want to go back to the original method, that'd be great. But it's kind of late in the game at this point, but for future debt, that's the way you should do it.
Well, I guess that's, from my perspective, that's the frustrating part of this whole discussion, is we had basically the same discussion 11 months ago. And we're not a day closer right now than we were 11 months ago.
So I'd say if we weren't a day closer, it's not there, it's not happening.
Which comes back to the $590,000 question,
actually
why
in
are
the
we doing
budget.
that?
Oh, you mean the whole schedule?
Yeah. I thought it was in,
when you talk about water, I'll be right back.
I don't think so. It might be.
I thought it was.
Lois, is the debt schedule in the packet?
Where am I missing that at?
Is that up in the miscellaneous someplace?
I thought it was, but it's on page 5 of miscellaneous? Did I go right past it? Oh, I did, I went right past it. Yeah, so, yeah, here's where we're running out.
I guess I don't have a page 5.
You don't have page 5 on the under miscellaneous?
No. I don't have miscellaneous.
In the front? Way in the front?
Yeah, I'm in the front.
Oh,
And
you
just,
only got partial.
101.5 or?
just looking at that for an example is the 40-acre land purchase, the Harglow settlement, and the DWRF number 1, which DWRF number 1 comes off in 2025. Instead of doing $590,000 for Mason's Bluff and trying to pay these other ones off sooner, how much debt service would that get rid of on a resident's bill if we didn't have those three on there? How much would that lower their debt service on their bill?
Quite a bit.
Which ones, Dave?
If you looked at the land, the 40 acres that we bought,
Okay.
and if you looked at the Harglow settlement, which goes off after this year, and if you looked at DWRF 1, which goes off in 2025. If we got a little creative and found a way to get rid of those earlier,
Okay.
how much would that lower not even lower the debt service, how much money would you have to pay for something else that promoted the master plan for our water and sewer without raising anybody's bill?
Well, you could, but coming up with the money to pay those off is
Well, see,
sizable.
Well, I can find,
the Public Works does not get money from anybody except customers.
Mhm.
I understand that, but I can find right off the bat here, $700,000 that we want to put in the budget this year that is 39 and, it's 59,000 and 17,000 this year for a couple of items that maybe would be better off to use for something else.
Yeah, that's what we were talking about earlier, to apply it somewhere else, knock down.
You mean apply it to some of the debt?
What kind of information do we need?
We can't just keep adding debt service fees on here, because pretty quick, we're gonna price ourselves out of business.
Hey, what Dave is saying is if you pulled that, if we didn't fund the Mason's Bluff.
Well, you're talking about funding it, just putting it someplace else.
Well, you're talking about paying these off, paying off the 40 acres of land, for instance.
Yeah.
You got, what, 32, 47, $47,000 would pay off the 40 acres. Now, actually, a little less than that, because you wouldn't have the roll-up.
I would suggest that your first year
Arlo.
$59,000 payment on that $590,000 would pay off pretty much all of the land, the 40 acres.
Well, it would pay it all off.
Right. And
You
then
wouldn't pay
how
all that
much, if that
interest.
was gone, how much does that lower the debt service fee?
Actually, Dave, that first 16,000 is already in the budget, so
Yep.
what you're talking about, if you take that 59,000, we're paying off 2019 and 2020.
Could possibly pay off the Harglow settlement
Correct.
and the land.
More dollars.
So I'm just saying, if we got a little
Yeah.
creative with some of this, we could pay some of these off earlier, and we could start looking at
Lower your debt
a
retirement.
plan to move ahead on the phase two without taxing everybody to death.
But again, that would take, coming out of this budget session, a direction from the board that
Indicates.
by X date, we're going to, start in 2021, start the Phase 2 project. And then he wouldn't put that money into Phase 2 until 2021. And in the meantime, pay some of these off.
I think the first thing is pay them off and see where we stand in 2 years and see if it's feasible to do it and that, too, so.
First thing we need is a plan.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and
Again, I'll ask, what do you need, what do we need to further this thing down the road?
an action from the board saying that on such and such a year, we are starting the project for DWRF
First
two,
thing
and
that-
then he draws
The
up,
actual thing we need from the board is at this year, on this date, we want to have phase two completed.
right, and that starts
And then that puts it in you and Kurt's wheelhouse to figure out when you need to start what.
2024
to make that
to
happen.
be completed, then what are the phases that have to occur going back?
Once you figure out what has to happen to come to the end date, then it's easy to attach dollars to it and see what,
Yeah, then he
What it's gonna
knows,
cost
then
us.
he knows when it's time to submit the plan to, to get the plan updated, submit it to DEQ for consideration for funding, get the notice back, and then if they say no, we're dead in the water.
you never know if we don't ask, right?
We can't pay for it ourselves, but, I think we'd have a pretty good chance of getting DWRF funding. But, again, we need a commitment from the board, which is a key element in DWRF funding, that we're doing it. Because they don't want to get to the same place where we were ready to go last time and then stopped.
Well, if you made a decision tonight, I'm
Can't.
not even sure if we could,
Yeah, it's a work session.
I know, but I'm just saying,
If we did, if it was a motion, his time frame is.
Yeah, it's tight.
it'd be, I'm not even sure if we could make the application deadline.
Which is what, April?
Yeah,
April.
maybe.
If you're looking at
It's possible.
you're
I'd have to
looking
make a phone call like ASAP.
Well, if you're looking at 2024 or 2025 and finishing the project, I don't know if.
Should be
7
doable.
years.
Well, I mean, but
We've
we
already
never-
done the
We never know
exploration.
until it's laying out there and we have a plan that we can back down from and see when things have to be
Well, but
done.
we've already done the explanation. We know we've got the water source, we own it. So it's basically construction,
Getting your funding in place.
funding and construction.
If that's a 7-year window, then you can backtrack from that.
Yeah, the decision the board has to make is pretty easy. Do you want phase 2 done and when do you want it done?
That's pretty much it.
Once you
And-
make that
Right,
basic
yeah.
decision,
And that's the
the
decision that
rest of
he
it's
needs to
in
be able to
Kurt's
go
house to
forward.
figure out
Right.
what steps we need to take to get us
Right.
there. But we need to make that decision pretty quick because we're just frittering away time
Your
here.
knuckles are getting sore from knocking on that door. It's been up and down and up and down. We've been talking about this now for how long? Over 10 years.
And I guess that's where my whole
Well,
conversation started with, is I have a
37
problem.
years.
Well, no, but I mean, since the last actual action.
I have a
was 10
problem
years.
talking about a budget that's got, approving an expense of what, $760,000 in it,
No, man.
when we don't, without the plan, we don't know what where we're headed with it.
So that could be part of your consensus budget. To remove those items from this budget, put them back into play to reduce other debt retirement.
Call them anything except, call it a slush fund if you want, but call it something
Well, it wouldn't be,
besides.
it wouldn't be,
Slush is a bad
it wouldn't be,
Call
a-
it something besides.
you know, it wouldn't be a
Bridgeton
slush
Road
fund.
and-
What it would be is the board taking a position of saying we are going to reduce other debt retirement pending our determination of future debt. And here's how we're gonna do it.
I think we should make that an agenda item. For the 8th, I think it would be.
That would be a good thing.
You're doing the agenda.
But I think it'd be good for the whole board is to plug into Kurt's brain there and just see what he's got in his head, what he's been thinking about. I've talked to him, not lately, but a while back, and what he thinks the township would have and where we should go and what we need and stuff like that.
Well, Jason and Isaac too, because they're talking to developers.
Yeah, exactly.
All the time.
I think we should have that discussion.
Well, the board's decision is pretty simple. It's, do we want to have a means by which we are somewhat, we could discuss water independence by 2025? Or don't we? Do we just want to go along and think that everybody's going to play nice and we're going to end up with a rate that doesn't break the residents?
Well, it's even beyond that. It's beyond, I mean, that's gonna be whatever it is, and it's gonna depend on who's sitting in the seats on both sides, whether it's here and there. The bigger picture is, what is it that this community wants to do to benefit the development that you want to have? And that's gonna require expanding our water system.
Well, I think when last time, way back in, prior to December, when you were talking about the last time we were talking about Morgan Meadows, I wasn't even on the board yet, but you were talking about possible forecast rates from the city. And I think the number was so large that everybody just quit considering it because they couldn't deal with it.
Didn't want to.
Yeah, you really need to consider that is a real possibility if we don't take some action ourselves,
Well, it's getting
put
closer.
ourselves in a better bargaining position.
Well, again, it's not only the cost of water, okay? If we have to go back to the city and buy more water, it's also the pumping
Correct.
and the delivery cost,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what's gonna kill us.
But you also have to look at, Kirk, is what's around us. You know, if you look around at what's going on in your different communities and that, and they have a product that we need if we don't do anything else, all right? they have financial problems, and their finances are gonna get bigger in the future, just because what some of the things that's happening around here is that, and they're gonna have to raise their rate. And to what rate can we afford? If we don't do something like this, long range, would we be better off? So, that's what I look at.
Yeah, you've had the DEQ stand up here in front of you
He
half a
said,
dozen times.
We paid for the
saying-
report.
Saying,
Get all the water you can.
and expand your system.
Identify where all the water is.
Yeah. And expand your system.
Yeah.
So, you know, if we want to go in a residential, if we want to go in the residential direction, there's only two ways to go. One is up 492, and the other is back here. You're not going to go up 550. That's not going to happen.
We can't go south because.
There's no way to get there. You got the Dead River
Right.
and the Dead River Basin between getting to your residence to the north along 550.
We could run a water main up through their new roundabout.
But I mean, you know, and realistically, that, you know, eventually that area will develop up there simply because it's along the lake shore. But it's gonna be based on individual wells. It's not gonna be based on a water system. There's just no way to produce that. Can't get it there. You'd have to drill under the Dead River, which the DEQ is not going to allow. We already found that, we know that already, because that was one of the options we looked at originally for the first phase.
But as far as
So you-
development, Randy, they had, on 492, we have the subdivision, we got the roads in there, we got fire hydrants in there, you know, but they can't sell it without having
Want
water,
to have water, yeah.
you know, and if we're looking for something, we're not
They are
have to wait.
selling it.
Huh?
They are selling it. They
Well,
don't have water.
they've sold it.
Yeah.
You know, there's a buyer
But
without.
they're
they-
figuring on they're gonna get water from us.
Well, they have limited development capability.
Right.
They can only develop a handful of the lots with the water that's there currently, not the full development that was planned.
Right.
But directly adjacent to it is 120 acres that's prime for development.
Exactly.
Doesn't have water. And then on the other side of the road is another chunk of property that is prime for development and has a developer who wants to develop it, but no water.
Yeah,
So
I
if
just-
there's a pipe down 492, residential development will occur down 492.
It just seems that shouldn't be that difficult to come up with a plan for infrastructure, whether you're talking wastewater or water, and put that together with an asset management program for what you have in place. And the cost structure falls right in line with, you can see what you got.
Sure. I mean, that's how Oak Hill's developed. They put their own water system in.
Yeah.
Series of wells, a pumping station.
Who was that?
Oak Hill's, that is not faring very well. They have water difficulty, so they would connect if we had
Right.
water up that way. You know, there's quite a bit of opportunity, and it's not just to be in a better bargaining position, it's to develop the way you want to develop for a tax base. Yeah, that's the bottom line, is, you know, residential is the tax base, stable tax base.
And our neighbors, they're gonna run out of land for people to build, so where's
Well,
the opportunities?
We are too. I mean,
Oh, I know.
Trowbridge is filling up. We're running out of
Right.
room in Trowbridge.
All right, well, this is a good place to stop. So I foresee for next time, when we continue the water discussion, is that sheet, imagine that sheet that Dave was talking about. And I think I will put on the agenda for the 8th, the water discussion.
It's becoming critical, because there's gonna come a point where you're just not gonna be able to make it happen in time.
And we'll talk about wastewater next time. And probably, there's different issues with the wastewater, but a summary sheet would probably be helpful there also. All right, so any public comment?
We
we
Silence
drove
is
the news
deafening.
lady away.
We talked about different
Oh.
kinds of meetings and that.
Public comment is closed. Meeting wrap-up, any announcements? I have none. And adjournment at 7 o'clock.
We could have this